All right, welcome everyone to the HashiCorp Ambassador Thought Leader Series, where we have our most esteemed community members and experts talk to us about the big ideas in our knowledge space. This means everything infrastructure, networking, applications, and security, and the techniques, principles, and lessons learned that we hope y'all, the audience, can make use of. Before we get too deep into it, obviously there is another human being here on the stream with me. But beforehand, I do just want to remind everyone of our community guidelines. They are pretty simple. Just don't be a troll. And if that is confusing to you, check out the link there. It has very fine-grained details on how to not do that. And another thing is, while we are doing this live, we will have this recording up on YouTube, and we'll also have it in podcast form on our HashiCast. So look forward to that. Now, obviously, I have someone to the right of me, on the stream. And would you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, Cole. Hey, everybody. My name is Pato. Should I also say what I do, what I work, and all that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, you should totally do
that. I'm based out of New York City. I've been HashiCorp Ambassador since the beginning of the program, which was 2020, I believe. Work for a company that I'm not going to bore you with all that because it's not a sales pitch or anything. And it's even if it was a sales pitch, we're like business to enterprise, so probably you've never heard of us. But we do AI conversation systems for companies that need to have customer support or customer contact. So when you have to call your bank, your airlines, etc. So like we have a couple of services there, but from just a chat platform to voice recognition to transcription and a bunch of different things. So all that is done by the smarter people that like know how to do the math and the science and all that. I just play with servers.
Yeah, you're being very humble because we know that all of that other stuff is just a couple files on the box that you're maintaining, right? Yeah. Right. So that's Pato, right? I've known him for a while, and so I wanted to get him on here for this episode for sure. If you are here, you've seen the title, and it is quite quizzical, to say the least. In fact, when Pato brought it up, he's like, day 366. I was like, that's not a thing, right? Like, there's only 365. And then he explained it, and then he started talking about elephants, and I was like, okay, we're going down a pipeline. But it wound up being a very fascinating topic, a really cool idea. And in a nutshell, Pato, what was the idea that you wanted to get on and talk about today?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple of different thoughts there in the title, and they'll become clear as we start going. But so first of all, there's the idea of we've all heard about day 1, day 2, or day 2 plus, if you want, and how sometimes things are easy to set up with like following the hello world. And then like that's how you show it running, but then when you have to operationalize it, that's day 2. But then what happens when down the road there's things that happen a year from now, and like one of the examples, and we can talk about it later, is when certificates expire after 365 days. So what happens the next day? What happens when like something's kind of static, but then you have to make a change? Like how does that happen down the road?
Yeah.
There's also the thought of like when you build something that again like works for the first first phase of the project, and then you start building stuff around it. Like how do you evolve the outside layers as well as like the core of the thing that you started working with, right? Kind of also the ideas of like we all have to make trade-offs and decisions when you're building stuff, right? So like how do you deal with the decision like at the moment, but also later on, and how do you like manage that risk between in quotes, but those are the main things.
Yeah, and I mean it's to me what's neat about this is we have a ton of great content, and I see Jasmine White's jumped in, so hello to our community manager. What's neat about this to me is a lot of this content that you'll see out there is about that beginning process. It's about day 1, week 1, year 1, right? And then we forget, oh, hey, what comes next? How do you maintain that next? And all the stuff that Pato just talked about is thinking about that from that long-term perspective. So really neat. Really looking forward to get into that. And in terms of importance, Pato, you sort of relayed 3 concrete examples / stories to me of why this was something that came from personal experience. And like, could you go through those?
Yeah. You mean you want to like talk about specific examples?
Oh yeah, just like I remember this all began with this story about the certificates, right? Maybe related again. And we also had the credentials thing with the database.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, with the certificate one, it's this happened some time ago. We had set up, a Kubernetes cluster with some automation, but we had like a good set of Kubernetes controllers. We had set up things with Terraform. We had Vault running. And everything was running fine. And there was one certificate that was used, I think, for Kubernetes webhook or something that suddenly started to fail. Sometime after we set up, sometime after things had been running perfectly. And obviously it happens when like somebody really needs it and it's like, but it was working yesterday. So like you can't realize because you didn't commit a thing, you didn't run a pipeline. So after some investigation, it became clear that it was a certificate that expired 365 days. So this was day 366. That's part of the title of the talk. Mm-hmm. And it was because we kind of took a shortcut and just created a certificate and just put it there as a secret, but didn't take the time to either use Cert Manager on Kubernetes or use Vault, PKI, or whatever, like any of that automation. Mm-hmm. We just kind of set it up, put it, release it into the wild, and didn't consider the long-term consequence. So we thought about day one, spin it up, it works. Thought about day two, these are the pipelines, this is the repo, this is the GitOps operations. We didn't think about down the road.
Yeah. Right? Like day 366. And just in case that y'all haven't caught on, we don't mean that this literally all gets built in 3 days. It's just sort of a bucket that sort of a category we use it to say, like, where is it? Is it the initial phase when you're standing it up, when you're getting it set up, or like afterwards when you're maintaining it? And Pato, of course, is talking about what comes after that. So we can talk about some of those stories, but just for time, you had 3 main big ideas and principles in this thought idea. And what happens after a year? How do you maintain that? And one of the very first ones had to do with elephants, right? Pato, I actually had never heard this. So why don't you break us into this first principle and idea?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is, I'm sure people have heard of it. I remember hearing about it when I was, 5, 6 years old. I actually forget when. Funny, because this has to do with memory. But the idea that elephants, when they're babies, they are tied to, in circuses, we know that circuses nowadays don't have animals anymore, and that's a good thing. But back in the day, that the baby elephants in the circus were tied to a stake that was in the ground. It was maybe about as big as the actual elephant and tied to a chain, right? So, but because the baby elephant was kind of very weak and like was trying to pull and couldn't pull, so like, it realized that it couldn't get away. So as the elephant grew, it didn't try to get away from the stake, even though the stake was the same size it always was, and the chain was like quite weak for a big elephant. But it goes to reflect the memory of the elephant that we reference often, that you think you keep a fixed mindset. I'm sure people have heard about this. It's in psychology is kind of a more recent sort of school of thought of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. So why does that have to do with software, right? And that's the part that people are here for. So again, coming from experience, both personal experience and the organizations that I've been with, how we tend to not worry about what's the path forward, but as long as things are working, to not touch it. And like the idea of if it's not broken, then I'm trying to fix it. Like that's actually not a good thing in software. Like it's maybe a good thing in other fields, to different degrees, but in software, it's like you can't expect that things are static all the time. If you think about it, even if you turn on some old computer that you had, that's in the attic some time ago, even if you turn it on right now, it's not going to work the same as it did, a few years ago. So, avoiding that kind of don't try to fix it if it's not broken mentality. And at times this gets reflected in, it's a good thing that, for example, in GCP and EKS, on AWS, the upgrades of Kubernetes, for example, they are forced, right? They're forcing you to get
but
upgrades.
Pato, do you actually? So like, right. So how do you? So quick kind of question. Like when those updates are forced, how do you How do you put? Because surely you don't like that every time, right?
Well, I mean, no, but
Yeah.
the fact that that's imposed on us, it's there is a risk, and now also GCP, I think Azure too, and AWS, they offer extended support, and you have to pay a little extra, but it's not forever, right? It reaches a point where you either cannot operate on the cluster or cannot update it, or it's updated automatically. And with Kubernetes, because like the deprecations and removals are a thing, then you might find yourself in a tough spot. So one of the things that happen often is that, well, so stepping back a little bit, for other things like, just if we talk about the HashiCorp stack, you have Vault, Consul, Nomad, whatever running, or even just the Terraform binary. You can keep working with those for a long time, and they're not necessarily going to be like the updates are not going to be enforced. Actually, I know that HCP boundary is enforced, like that upgrade happens automatically. But other than that, then at some point you find yourself trying to mitigate the risk of upgrading by adding layers around it. Then those layers are things that are kind of like not necessarily standard. They tend to be sort of, like glued together. And then
go ahead.
No, I was going to say then at a later point in time, maybe there's functionality for those same things out of the box that make your middleware layer redundant, but you never take the time to go and like look at the changelog or check for updates, or even just security updates or things that, or even just for sanity, say like we are running the latest Vault, for example. Right?
That's
gets overlooked.
So in other words, like, hey, like you've made some sort of change that maybe at the point in time was pretty good. And now we fast forward a year later and it's either not optimal or it's got some sort of major issue. And so there's a leak in the ceiling now. And you're like, well, the temptation is just throw a bucket down and catch the water. And then you have that bucket and you're like, well, now I got to think about getting a better bucket. And we got to think about bucket ops and all these other things. And
So, I mean, the way that, and we'll talk about like that kind of ties into something we want to talk later on maybe, but the way in general that I've seen this kind of addressed in organizations, this is, and by the way, most of the things that we're going to talk about today are not easily fixed with technology or with automation, because a lot of this is like just the human aspect of things. But and like we are, like humans are flawed, we are flawed. Like it's like we need to be aware of that, of those flaws to be able to address them, right? But so organizations sometimes have policies about like updates in general between just platforms like Kubernetes, Nomad, etc. Just language libraries, dependencies, binaries like Terraform, for example. So establish a good story around everything. You can't depend on one guy or woman being in charge of the updates for their kind of like piece of the ecosystem, right? You have to have a concrete story that makes sense organizational wide.
That makes sense. And so that was kind of that, because I think we were talking about sort of these main 3 points here, right? So the practical side of this is you can't just rely on one person, right? You need to have this something that is, and almost bleeds into our second big idea and principle that you wanted to talk about. But in terms of practical advice, just sort of to wrap this one up, unless of course you had more on it. So here's the issue: no matter where you are, you probably have a fixed thing somewhere that could be improved, has issues, and maybe you've become blind to it, right? And Pato, your advice, if we're going to change that, obviously we can't necessarily do that with automation, but what steps can people take?
Right. I mean, there are some tools for, I don't think I've found a tool that does this like across the board, like, because it's very different detecting an upgrade in Kubernetes control plane versus a Go library, right? So these are kind of different realms. There are tools like Renovate, for example. There's a cron job thingy that you can run on-prem, and then we'll scan all your GitHub repos and give you updates, and sometimes generate automatic PRs and even automatic merges for things. There's like Snyk or SNYK or GitHub, what's it called? GitHub Advanced security or something like that to detect security patches. So there are some things that you can do there.
Yep.
I don't think there's a tool that like scans your, Nomad, Consul, Vault things, or like any of the other controllers that you may run in Kubernetes. It's hard to find something that. So it's a matter of understanding what are like the big buckets of your dependencies and like address those as technically as you can.
Yep. And it seems like, and it's got to be a people thing, right? It has to. So
Yeah,
you've got to get the whole company on board with it, because
or AI in the future maybe, but
robots. Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah. And so that sort of plays into the next big idea and principle, right? So we just came from, you've got a fixed mindset. It is probably a people issue ultimately. Obviously, we've got to fix technology. You're going to need company-wide buy-in from it. There are different sets of tools that can aid you, but there's not necessarily one that you've found so far that can do everything. But on that culture piece, that sort of breaks us into that next point, which was what, Pato?
Yeah, so and I call it a follow-up culture. It's I don't know if that's a name that's going to catch on, but just the idea will make it happen. Well, we'll repost this, we'll make this a TikTok, and it's going to go viral with Jensen's or whatever. So just the idea of following up on things that need to be fixed. So we've all been there. We need to make a manual change directly on the Kubernetes cluster. We need to like update something live because it's an urgent incident, and we need to get it resolved now. We know that the proper solution is put it somewhere in code, but we don't have time to do that. That's okay. But what I'm saying is that there are follow-ups to patch the shortcuts that we take. Sometimes it's not an urgent shortcut because we need to do something right now. Sometimes it's hey, maybe I don't know, I'm using this deprecated API because it's what we need today. We have a couple months to update it, but then we forget, or the person that took the decision leaves the company, they didn't leave that documentation. Maybe the person that did that created a certificate that expires 365 days later. You know what I mean? Yeah. So just the idea of being able to follow up on the things that we know. It's a little bit of it was like the Boy Scout, Girl Scout mentality of like just make sure that everything's clean and it's better than when you found it. Yeah. So again, a human kind of aspect to the technology side of things, right? Yeah.
And what's interesting to me about that is that kind of mindset, it almost runs to an extent counter towards that like scrappy move fast and break stuff thing, which like ironically is generally like we move fast, forget about that thing, just leave it in the wake that we're creating and just keep going forward, right? And that becomes the culture of, well, we're not even going to look backwards ever. We're never going to look backwards, and that creates these road bumps in the future.
Right.
Yeah. So what else did you have on this point here?
I mean, yeah, it's the other problem with that is that often in organizations that are not that, it's one of the downsides of remote work or like distributed companies that especially if you have like one office, there's a few people, other offices there's people, so like some of the conversations that happen kind of organically get lost in that distance. Not saying that distributed work is bad or work from is bad, not at all. I'm more of a, sorry, I'm touching my left mic. I'm more of a like in-office person. I would never force anybody to go there, but I'm saying like one of the things that we lost during the pandemic was like just missing out on those overheating conversations. So this all goes to sometimes a person that took the shortcut or made the decision of doing something, maybe communicated this decision or this action to the person next to them, or just told one person, or only one person was aware of this because we were in like the incident war room or whatever. Yeah. But the rest of the team is not aware of what was changed. Yep. And it's something that's easy to fix, and very often this is like a one-line change somewhere, but because the rest of the team is not aware, we don't know that something needs to be followed up on. So we're kind of relying on that person's ability to follow up. Yep. And that's not something you don't want to just depend on that. You want to make sure that this is something that's cultural and that's sort of established. And it doesn't mean that you only hire people that are good at following up and are very organized and like, it means that this is something that's kind of trainable and it's so easy to do.
Yep.
To-do list, Jira ticket, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a complicated thing to do. It's sort of like a quite easy to start doing,
mm-hmm.
and we'll have a payoff at some point in the future.
Yeah. So sort of like to bring that one back around, it generally starts as we're just going to put this in place now. We put it in place and it's working. And generally a small number of people may or may not know about it. And that has its own issues. And you're saying that like, oh, hey, this didn't seem as prevalent years back, because since you are in office, it's a little bit easier to have those conversations. But yeah, remote wise, it's totally easy to just do it and like not tell anybody. So it becomes another process you have to think about, like you said. And yeah, you need to throw it down somewhere in a Jira ticket or some sort of doc. And I think you talked about like kind of like keeping a doc or something like that, but though that may be in the next principle.
It's forget when we talked about this, but this is so I think you've heard the idea of the broken windows theory. Mm-hmm. It has been debunked or disagreed with, but the idea of the broken windows is that the broken windows theory refers to the fact that when you have neighborhoods in bad shape, windows are broken, some buildings are abandoned, or cars have the flat tires and they've been there forever. The idea that as long as you keep your windows fixed, then that's gonna kind of attract, or what's the word? Motivate the rest of the neighbors to keep their house, tidy up, and mm-hmm. then maybe like clean up the yard or whatever. So, but these are tiny tasks, or something that's doesn't take long. It's not like you're building a new school or something. It's like tiny tasks. So I try to the extent possible, and like I've done it on and off and throughout the years in different organizations, but keep a document called broken windows issues. And these are the things that are, quite simple to do, but because they either, update this variable name, or, remove this code, or, deprecate this API that nobody uses, but it's, has failing tests, whatever. So it's mm-hmm. Tiny things like that because they are small enough, they usually don't have visibility. Again, it's one of the things that maybe it wasn't a shortcut that was taken, maybe it's something that you noticed, but only you noticed and didn't communicate it because you didn't think it was important enough. Mm-hmm. Because they're not important enough, they tend to be deprioritized when you have like your priority meetings or backlog planning or whatever. But once we have visibility, and this is like a team kind of thing, it's easier to get those things resolved, and because they become like, like the junk that you have in a drawer or whatever, like you all have like that condiment drawer in the kitchen. Yeah. So small things like that end up, piling up, and the cleaner your sort of baseline is, the better, because like you don't want to have a bunch of small things in the future when you have like, your startup is taking off and you do have like other things to do to survive. You don't want to have to deal with this other thing. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I've totally seen that too, especially like if you're early stage startup, you come in, it's like, well, everything else is already a mess, so I'll just, why not?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
and that also gets kind of transmitted to new people. Like new people come in, maybe they come from different culture, different background, and they it feels like they have to do this the way that it's done. It's not necessarily that they join a company that they want to learn like how things work, but we're doing things the wrong way. So you don't want to like keep multiplying that effect.
Oh yeah. I remember there was I came into one startup and we had some function that was both like a problem, but the person had decided to use all single letters for like the variables, and just being like, yo, what does this do? And he's just very transparent. He's like, I have no idea, man. He's like, I wrote that so long ago. I don't know what's going on in that. So dealing with that, well, your sort of like proposed approach to just to wrap this point up, right? Mm-hmm. What can people do to sort of like to prevent this whole, hey, we have something that just sort of has become part of it. We're not following up with stuff. We just got patches everywhere. It looks like duct tape, right?
Right. So, I mean, this is one of the things that out of the things that we want to talk about, this is one of the things that it's least technical. The solution for it is least technical in nature. And the one thing that I always do is, or that I will suggest people, is just call people out. Be polite. Make sure that it's within the company's culture. But like, ask people, hey, why did you do this? Are you sure that this is the right thing to do? Does this belong in code somewhere? Let's create a ticket. Let's take the 1 hour of the day to just go make that one line change. Don't postpone it.
Mm-hmm.
It tends to happen more with, in my experience at least, with more junior engineers, because the solution, they want to show value in that they found a solution, they knew what it was, and they fixed it, and they saved the day for the incident, which is a good thing. We want to have people that's capable of performing under pressure, but it's harder. It comes from experience that it's not just that patch there. It's following up with the next thing. So just maybe calling out is the wrong word, but just remind people hey, there's this other follow up steps that we have to take, or ask hey, what was the solution that you added here? Are you sure that we created a ticket for putting it in code? Is this not something that's going to break another test that we're going to have to follow up and refactor the test as well? So just be proactive in that. And that being proactive, hopefully, is going to be transmitted to the rest of the team, and you're gonna kind of start that snowball effect of everybody's calling everybody out, and you want the point when it comes around and people call you out for the same thing. That's when you know that's getting traction.
Yeah,
and I know I've been there, and I've been called out by junior engineers as well, and it feels great.
That's why you talked about it as a culture thing. It is a people aspect of it, and probably the longer you get past day 1 through 2. Right, the more that's going to play an importance. But speaking of which, this is going to bring us into our final big idea here on this episode, right? So let's say that we don't have the follow-up culture in place as much, or maybe we do, and we've got sort of a tight deadline. I'm like, hey, Pato, let's just do it like this for now. All right, it's good enough. This third point, you had a really fun spin on it. You took a very well-known concept and sort of escalated. I thought it was very entertaining. So tell us about it.
Right. So we've all heard about tech debt, right? And it's generally defined as when you consciously taking some shortcut or some easier, lower hanging fruit option for fixing a problem that might buy you some time, but you know that the right solution is something else. It's going to take higher effort, and debt in general is not a bad thing. I'm saying debt, as long as it's responsible and you pay your Disney vacations with your credit card, but as long as you pay in time, that's fine, because you don't want to you want to have that vacation. Same in tech, you want to be able to maybe defer some work at the expense of it being higher effort later, but you are moving forward, you're unblocking people, or you get to do that demo for that big client because you need it today, right? But then there's a point in time where that tech debt becomes tech mortgage, right? And again, mortgages are not bad, but if you're not responsible in the management of the risk of time, you're assuming that you're going to have time later, but maybe later you're going to have less people because you had to lay people off, or you're going to have a bigger client, or priorities are going to be different. So doing a series of it works now, so we'll fix it later. To me, in my experience, again, my company and other companies that I've been with, and I don't think this is something bad, but the for now means forever. Because I'm saying this empirically because I don't have concrete proof, but every time people say that, I say no, I'm going to stop you right there. You're saying this for now, unless you show me some script that's going to delete your code or who's going to deprecate that thing, and it's going to it's in the blockchain and it's going to happen this moment. There's no way that you can commit to this for now or whatever, right? So just the idea that tech debt is good or bad, that doesn't mean that it's not that tech debt or even tech mortgage is good or bad, is that it should be done responsibly. But it's when it gets to an uncontrollable level, that's when it becomes problematic.
Yeah. And so your approaches for these, I kind of had 2 other points that you want to talk about around how do you deal with this, right?
Yeah. So I kind of said it jokingly earlier, but one of the ways that you can do, like, you can write some automation for forcing yourself to do the right thing. One of the examples I was thinking about it yesterday, a couple of days ago, is, for example, you can write in HTTP Terraform. That's a new name, right? HTTP Terraform is no longer Terraform.
Yeah.
So in HTTP Terraform, you can write a Sentinel policy or an OPA policy to block any applies after this date if certain change hasn't been made. So that forces you to, you're not letting yourself make changes if you haven't fixed this other thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's some automation options that we have there, right? So to the extent possible, that's one thing you could do. Also, again, this is harder because it's more of a like organizational human kind of thing, but just establishing accountability mechanisms of maybe like, what's the name of the thing? I've heard it from psychologists. It's essentially telling a buddy system of like, hey, I'm doing this thing, I'm taking this shortcut, but it's on you to remind me this time later that I'm gonna have to do it. If not, I'm gonna have to pay you $10 or whatever, or $10 goes to the end of year party fund or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Or I'll owe you whatever, cover on call for you next time, whatever. So to the extent that you can do establishing those accountability mechanisms, that's another way to approach it.
Yeah, nice. And then in terms of like kind of like solving the whole thing, you actually already brought up, I think I accidentally brought up your solution sort of a little bit early. But...
No, I also got ahead of it because it applies to both this concepts, and a lot of these concepts apply, like they kind of mix together, because it's like we're all humans in tech, we're all one big problem, right? Like it's there's the lines are kind of blurred, and like where we're the problem, where we're the solution. But talking about the broken Windows document again, that it is part of it is an accountability system, in that maybe it works in a different way, but it's an accountability mechanism in that you are recognizing this thing that you like, this shortcut that you took, or this flaw that you found, or maybe something that you found that somebody else did, and you're kind of calling it out there. Again, going back to the calling out. But also the other aspect of it is, again, it's okay to have debt, but we have to know what we're trading off. So document those trade-offs. But taking it a little bit step further, one thing that I can't say that I have done, I wish I try to convince people to kind of like have this practice, but the practice of doing like long-term, like longitudinal, whatever, postmortems of like, okay, a year from now, let's review this trade-off document and let's see what we did right, what we did wrong. Did we have like what-if scenarios that did they turn out correct or not? Would we, if we could go back in time, would we take a different decision? So sort of like learning from those things.
Yeah. So a technical reflection to an extent. So before we wrap up this point, I have one more sort of like thought for you. So I was thinking about this after we talked about this specific point. It's like, why are we so prone to take technical debt? Because obviously there is, the shortcut, but I also feel like that the difference here is that I can also just not be responsible for that debt. Like, I can make the decision now and be like, well, I'm not going to be here in 6 months, so then Pato just going to deal with it, and I don't have any debt at all.
And that's kind of natural. One of the things that's hard in software in software we take a lot of practices from the manufacturing industry, but one of the things that it's hard to do is the cost center versus profit center, and be able to have checks and balances of, hey, you are taking on this debt, but because it's hard to put in numbers and calculate, and also when that debt has to be paid off by somebody else, right? I'm running Vault 1.1 because I don't want to upgrade. So the other teams have to write like different code or different integrations, so the idea of being able to have those checks and balances and like know who took on the debt and who's paying off for it, that's in an ideal world where we have a way to do that, and we are closer to the way the manufacturing industry works. That would be great. I don't like, I don't know, like, no joke. One of the things that we've talked about once, and it's, you're gonna laugh because it has to do with blockchain, but like if we could have like an SRE coin kind of thing that like people mine by whatever, bribing SRE, the SRE team, and then we give people priority to people that like pay with SRE coin back, and I don't know. So that way of like having some checks and balances. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying be corrupt in your organization. I'm saying it's
no,
like
definitely not suggesting that.
how an SRE coin would be used.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just in general, the be mindful of, either you're going to have to pay your own tech debt later. So be honest about, like the work that you plan on taking on, or be open about it. Like, hey, we take this shortcut. We're going to be fine, but this other team is gonna pay the price. Or we are taking this shortcut. We're doing this low hanging fruit option, but we have to be clear with like marketing or sales or whatever that this is not going to be sustainable. So just like consider the cross team and even like cross like tech and non-tech communication of it more seriously.
So that wraps up sort of the whole idea of tech mortgage, and that all sort of plays into the original theme, right? The whole theme was the elephant in the infrastructure is that there's stuff beyond day 0, 1, and 2. And there's a lot of things that happen with that. And a lot of it does have to do with the people, the developer side, right? The type of culture that you set into place, whether or not you're thinking about improving stuff, not just putting it down in one place, and then being smart about the trade-offs that you put into place. But in general, like your in general sort of like solution seems to be, we have to start with us as the developers. We are both the problem and the solution. What's sort of your general advice to solving this day 366 operations and addressing the elephant in the infrastructure?
Right. So one of the things that I've found that is effective, because I've been an IC, I guess, most of my career. So I like being on the technical side of things. I like being hands-on. You and I have talked about, I have my Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster. It's actually behind that shelf. And it's kind of my home lab, and it's like I run experiments there. One of the things I wanted to mention earlier too is that I have, because I'm a big nerd, I have sometimes just for fun, I go and read the changelog of projects that I experimented with in the past, but didn't quite like. So it's kind of like look at what's new. And often that's because I have my cluster set up a little bit ahead of what we have at work. So sometimes I've found issues
nice
at home. So like by the time that we upgrade, that's been useful. But yeah, so I was saying that I've been more on the technical IC individual contributor side. So for the longest time, I was frustrated because I knew what the right solution was, and I knew that I had the technical skills that maybe managers or people above me in the chain may not have either the visibility or the knowledge or the skills or whatever to know how to fix. So I was frustrated that I wasn't able to convince like my manager or like go up the chain. But I found out that, or like realized that the way to get traction is to actually get one of your peers to have an ally to like convince one of your peers, especially another more technically oriented IC, so that you get that person's buy-in or support. And then once you have it doesn't have to be one, but you start with one. Once there's some traction there, you can get the manager, you can go to the project manager or whatever. So like, hey, like we are in agreement that this is the right thing to do, so we should do this. We have all these opinions. We are it's not one person that has like one idea and like they want to like go rogue and do the thing. It's like we all need this. So that's kind of the main advice. And this works at any stage in your career, like junior people that like are not, you don't have the voice or the seat at the table. It's easier to get like an ally and a peer, but at the same time, the 15-year career like architect that cannot get traction because the management is not technically oriented. So like get an ally and somebody that understands the solutions that you're trying to pitch.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice.
That and the other advice is just drink water. Like, oh, by the way, I have a HashiCorp.
Oh, nice, nice.
I got this at some HashiCorp, which was hard to transport because this is glass. It's hard to transport back, to be careful with it.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So what else can people check out, Pato? I know you had some stuff you wanted to show as we wrap up here.
Right. So I have here, so like Instagram.com, patoarvizu.io. That's, I need to be more active, but I post some tech content there, some like explainers and whatnot. I think my last post is a live video when I was at AWS Summit in New York.
Nice.
So I'm local in New York. If you know of any meetups or want to like chat, have coffee, whatever, you can contact me here and be happy to talk. Other two things is there's a book called Making Work Visible. Authors Dominica de Grandes. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Hold that up so, while you talk. Yeah.
So this is actually more for like project managers, but there's a lot of like again talking about the human aspect of like workflows and work management and prioritization and all that goes to like what we talked about earlier in terms of planning, taking shortcuts, understanding that, documenting that. There's a lot of, like, she talks about a lot of things that, you know, the tiny shortcut I had to take to modify something manually, but that's not captured in like a plan. But it's not just the 5 minutes to do that, is the 3 hours and it's going to take you to run the tests and do the code, etc. But like that's not captured, and that takes up half your day that you were supposed to use to work on a feature or whatever. Right. So, you know, it's I got this directly from her at a DevOps Days once, but I'm pretty sure you can find it somewhere. The other thing, just again, kind of a plug. So Brian Carlson, he's another HashiCorp Ambassador. Right. The best kept secrets of HashiCorp Vault. I don't know if you're going to be interviewing him. You should, but I did contribute.
There you are.
I did contribute a chapter, so I don't get royalties. I don't get anything. This is more of like, you know, me bragging. One of those things. My mom has one of these. My mom knows.
Oh, there we go.
Actually, my mom doesn't even speak English, and like she knows zero technology, but she has one of these because, you know, there's numbers right here. Right.
Nice.
Right.
Nice.
That's it, man.
Yeah. So, and also, if y'all are going to be at HashiConf 2024 in Boston, Pato is going to be on one of our panels there, and he'll also be there live as well, so you'll be able to meet him.
Right.
But I think that's it, right? I think that's all we've got. So, thank you so much.
October 14th to 16th, right?
Yeah, October 14th through 16th. You'd think that the HashiCorp dude would have said that, but that's why you're an ambassador, and I am not. All right. Thank you so much, Pato, for taking the time to share your thoughts and ideas. And thanks to everyone who tuned in to watch, whether you were here with us live or after the fact. And look forward to more episodes of the HashiCorp Ambassador Thought Leader Series. And until next time.
Hey, folks.